5:47 a.m. Boone County, Iowa. March 14th, 2026. Ethan Vasquez parked his service truck at the base of Turbine 27 and reached for the steel access door. He stopped. The metal was warm. Not slightly warmer than the air. Warm the way a radiator is warm. The way a furnace room door is warm. Every other turbine base he had touched that morning registered 34 degrees. This one radiated heat like a running oven, and the frost around its concrete pad had melted in a perfect ring, bare gray concrete surrounded on all sides by untouched white ground. Vasquez had been servicing wind infrastructure for 6 years. He had touched hundreds of turbine base doors in every season Iowa produces. He had never touched one that felt like this. The sensation stopped him the same way a wrong sound stops you, not with fear exactly, but with the immediate biological knowledge that something in your environment does not match your model of how the world is supposed to work. He stood there for 4 seconds. He looked at the frost ring. He looked at the road leading back to the county highway. He looked at the door again. Then he pulled out his phone and photographed the door, the frost ring, and the temperature reading on his truck's external gauge. He did not open the door. He did not rattle the handle. He did not call out. He got back into his truck, reversed slowly down the access road without turning on his headlights, drove 3 miles down the county road, pulled into the parking lot of a diner called Hazel's, where 2 semi-trucks idled against the far fence, and called the FBI Omaha field office from his personal cell phone. He did not know what he had found. But he knew that warm doors on cold mornings do not explain themselves. What agents would find inside that concrete vault 11 days later would close one of the longest missing persons investigations in a 4-state region in over a decade. 6 women, 116 days. And a criminal operation that had hidden itself inside the most overlooked infrastructure in rural America. The Prairie Ridge Wind Complex outside Boone County, Iowa, was not the kind of place anyone paid close attention to. 41 turbines strung across 8,400 acres of leased corn and soybean ground. Owned on paper by an out-of-state holding company called Meridian Leasework LLC, registered in Delaware, contracted for annual inspections through a Minneapolis-based service outfit called Norwind Technical Services. The turbines had been generating power since 2021. The farmers whose land surrounded the towers had long since stopped noticing them. They were part of the landscape. Background infrastructure. Invisible by design. That invisibility was not an accident. Investigators would later establish that Meridian Leasework LLC had been structured specifically to resist scrutiny. Its managing member was a shell, registered in the Cayman Islands. Its sole operational contact in the United States was a post office box in Minneapolis. The lease on the Prairie Ridge site had been negotiated through a broker in 2021, renewed automatically every 2 years, and paid by wire transfer from a Luxembourg correspondent bank. No one at the Iowa Utilities Board had ever flagged it. No one at the county assessor's office had reason to. On paper, Meridian Leasework LLC was a routine renewable energy leaseholder, one of dozens across the upper Midwest. The broker who negotiated the original lease was a commercial real estate agent based in Des Moines named Gary Tilden. According to public court filings, he cooperated with investigators and provided records of the original lease negotiation. He said he had been contacted by a representative of Meridian Leasework through a referral, had handled the transaction as a standard commercial lease of agricultural land for wind easement purposes, and had no knowledge of the company's actual ownership or intended use of the infrastructure. Investigators reviewed his financial records and found no payments beyond his standard commission. His cooperation produced the first documentary thread that led to the Luxembourg bank account. That account, investigators would eventually establish, had processed $940,000 in wire transfers over the previous 26 months, originating from 3 different source institutions across 2 continents. $940,000 for a wind easement that generated no power. That number is in the court filing. The 6 women who disappeared between October and November of 2025 did not disappear from Iowa. The first was reported missing on October 9th from Lincoln, Nebraska. In federal records, she is Jane Doe 1. She was 26 years old, worked as a licensed practical nurse at a long-term care facility on the west side of Lincoln, and had last been seen leaving a parking garage near her apartment at 8:17 p.m. after a double shift. Her car was found 2 days later at a truck stop on Interstate 80, keys in the ignition, phone in the cup holder, a coffee cup still sitting in the center console that had gone cold. The surveillance footage at the truck stop showed her vehicle arriving, but did not capture usable imagery of anyone approaching or leaving it. Her car had been left in an overflow lot outside the camera's effective range. Her family filed the missing persons report within 18 hours of her last known contact. Lincoln PD worked the case for 4 days before Nebraska State Patrol took coordination responsibility. The second was reported missing October 19th from Wichita, Kansas. 23 years old, administrative assistant at an insurance firm in the College Hill neighborhood. Last seen at a gas station convenience store 3 blocks from her apartment, captured on the store's interior camera at 9:44 p.m., buying a bottle of water and a pack of gum. She paid with a debit card. The transaction cleared. The camera showed her exiting through the front door. She did not arrive home. Her roommate called her cell phone 7 times between 11 p.m. and midnight before contacting police. The Wichita Police Department opened a missing persons case the following morning. There were no usable images from exterior cameras at the gas station. The parking lot camera had been offline for service since October 15th. By November 15th, 4 more women had been reported missing from small cities across Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri. Ages 23 to 28. All American citizens. All reported by family members within 48 hours of their last known contact. All disappearances geographically spread and methodologically consistent, with no leads for 11 weeks. Nebraska State Patrol, Kansas Bureau of Investigation, and the Missouri State Highway Patrol had each opened separate cases. The FBI's Omaha field office had cross-referenced the cases by mid-November and opened a federal missing persons investigation. By December, the working theory was a coordinated abduction operation. Everything was unknown: the mechanism, the location of the women, the number of suspects. For 63 days, the investigation produced nothing actionable. The strange part is that the answer was sitting inside a concrete vault in a cornfield in Iowa the entire time. I spent time going through the case file, and one detail kept nagging at me. The 6 women were taken from 3 different states over 37 days, using consistent methods but spread across jurisdictions in a way that defeated any single agency's pattern recognition. Whoever ran this operation understood how law enforcement silos work. They use the seams between jurisdictions as cover. That is not improvised. That is institutional knowledge applied deliberately. The Prairie Ridge site had been selected for the same reason. Wind infrastructure on federal lease sits in a regulatory gap. The Bureau of Land Management oversees the lease. The Iowa Utilities Board oversees the interconnection. The county sheriff's office has jurisdiction over road access, but no reason to inspect the turbine base vaults, which are privately maintained under the Norwind service contract. A 12-foot deep concrete service vault normally houses transformer gear, switching equipment, and cable terminations. Locked. Marked with standard electrical hazard signage. Required by code to maintain an internal temperature range for equipment protection. The internal temperature requirement, between 55 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit, was in the original construction spec. Someone installed a bypass power line to maintain that temperature, using the code requirement as cover. Turbine 27 had not sent a single kilowatt back to the grid in 116 days. Its generation meters showed zero output. Zero output on a turbine should have triggered an automatic alert to Norwind Technical Services. It did. Norwind's dispatch log shows the alert was logged on November 18, 2025. It was flagged for a maintenance visit assigned to a contractor. The contractor's scheduling system shows the visit as completed on December 2nd. It was not completed. The December 2nd entry was a falsification. That falsification kept the operation invisible for nearly 4 additional months. And it would have remained invisible indefinitely if Ethan Vasquez had not been assigned to a different turbine on a different morning and parked his truck at the wrong tower. The most surprising thing about this case is not the audacity of hiding something inside a wind turbine vault. It is that the entire concealment strategy depended on people not being curious about things they had no institutional reason to examine. For 116 days, it worked. Vasquez called FBI Omaha at 6:02 a.m. on March 14th. He reached the duty agent, identified himself, gave the address of the turbine access road, described the warm door and the frost ring, and provided the GPS coordinates from his truck's navigation system. He gave facts. The duty agent logged the call and contacted the on-call supervisor. By 8 a.m., 2 agents from the Omaha field office were heading toward Boone County. At that point, it was an anomaly, possibly an equipment malfunction, possibly unauthorized squatting, possibly a grow operation using the vault for climate control. The thermal photograph Vasquez had sent showed a door surface temperature of 61 degrees Fahrenheit on a morning when the ambient air temperature was 32. That gap, 29 degrees, was the first hard data point. The field agents arrived at Turbine 27 at 9:44 a.m. They confirmed the frost ring and the door temperature. They noted tire tracks in the shoulder mud, consistent with vehicles larger than a standard passenger car, partially obscured by fresh snow from the past 48 hours. They did not breach. Instead, Agent Renata Okafor photographed every surface within 30 meters of the vault door, collected GPS waypoints at 12 separate positions around the concrete pad, and called Omaha to request a utility records pull on the Prairie Ridge complex. What the utility pull showed changed everything. The interconnect data from the Iowa Utilities Board showed that Turbine 27 had not generated power since mid-November, but its metered incoming draw had been running at 112 kilowatt-hours per day through a secondary bypass line. That is not transformer standby power. That is not environmental control for switching gear. 112 kilowatt-hours per day is residential tier consumption, the equivalent of running a small apartment's heat, light, and ventilation continuously. No licensed engineer had ever filed a permit for that bypass line. No Norwind service record documented its installation. The Iowa Utilities Board had no record of its authorization. Someone had tapped into the grid to run power into that vault, quietly, for months, using a connection that existed nowhere in any official record. Agent Okafor called Omaha again. This time she used the word exigent. While Okafor held the perimeter and waited for warrants to move through the federal system, investigators in Omaha began pulling everything available on Meridian Leasework LLC. The Delaware corporate registration listed a registered agent, a law firm in Wilmington, that served as registered agent for approximately 12,000 other entities. The firm had no substantive knowledge of Meridian's operations. Its only contact had been a single email exchange in 2021 during incorporation and 2 annual fee payments processed automatically from a bank account that traced to the Luxembourg Correspondent Institution. A financial analyst at the FBI's Omaha field office spent 90 minutes on March 14th building the ownership diagram on a whiteboard. She later described it in court proceedings as looking like a subway map for a city that didn't exist. Layers of entities referencing each other in circles, designed to waste the time of anyone trying to follow them. That design was intentional. The opacity of the ownership structure was not a side effect of doing business across multiple jurisdictions. It was the product. The people who built it understood that every additional shell entity, every additional correspondent bank, every additional country of registration added investigative hours that most underfunded cases would never generate. A missing persons case in Nebraska does not automatically produce the resources to unwind a Cayman to Luxembourg financial structure. They had not counted on Ethan Vasquez parking his truck at the wrong tower. By 2 p.m. on March 14th, the FBI's Omaha field office had stood up an emergency coordination call with the Missing Persons Task Force running since November. The utility consumption data was cross-referenced against the timeline of the disappearances. Turbine 27's bypass line had drawn its first anomalous power load on November 17th, 8 days after the last of the 6 women had gone missing. The timeline aligned within the tolerance of investigative coincidence, which is to say, it was not coincidence. The lease records for Meridian Leasework LLC were pulled simultaneously. The Omaha office contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Iowa and began drafting emergency warrant applications. At 4:37 p.m., the applications were filed. By 7 p.m., a federal magistrate had issued 4 warrants, one for the vault, one for Meridian Leasework LLC's financial records, one for Norwind Technical Services' internal scheduling and personnel databases, and one for the cell tower records covering a 2-mile radius of Turbine 27 going back 120 days. The operation was moving fast, faster than the suspects anticipated. 3 names emerged from the Norwind personnel database within hours. 2 current contractors with access credentials for Prairie Ridge since the project's commissioning. 1 former contractor whose credentials had been listed as revoked in November, but who had not been removed from the physical key fob system. That oversight would place one of the 3 suspects at the site on at least 6 documented occasions after his official termination. His name in federal court documents is listed as Defendant 1. He was 39 years old. He had worked in wind infrastructure maintenance for 11 years. He understood the regulatory gaps and vault specifications. He had spent the previous 2 years cultivating relationships with the principals of Meridian Leasework LLC, whose actual ownership traced to a debt bondage operation running across the central United States since at least 2023. The cell tower data pulled under the March 14th warrant was processed overnight by the FBI's Digital Intelligence Unit. The tower records showed a consistent pattern, a specific device identifier appearing within range of the Prairie Ridge Complex every 3 to 4 days, typically in the early morning hours between midnight and 5 a.m., for visits lasting between 40 minutes and 2 hours. The device was registered to a prepaid carrier under a name that did not match any individual in federal databases. The pattern had been running since mid-November, and it had stopped abruptly on March 13th, the day before the breach. On 6 separate occasions, the same device identifier appeared in tower records from the cities where the 6 women had gone missing, in the days immediately preceding each disappearance. Lincoln, Nebraska, Wichita, Topeka, Joplin, Omaha, Kansas City. The same device, in each city, in each window. That pattern, invisible because no single investigative agency had previously held all 6 cases simultaneously, had been sitting in the cell tower records the entire time. Nobody had looked for it, because nobody had known to look for it in the same place. Here is what this case tells us about infrastructure-based concealment operations. The most dangerous hiding places are not the ones that are hard to find. They are the ones that nobody has a specific institutional reason to look for. Prairie Ridge's Turbine 27 was hiding in a system designed to make it someone else's problem. The Utilities Board thought it was a maintenance issue. Maintenance thought it was a utilities issue. The county had no jurisdiction. The FBI had no reason to look there until Ethan Vasquez put his hand on a warm door at 5:47 in the morning. Put yourself in the position of Special Agent Okafor for a moment. You are standing in a frozen cornfield in March, looking at a concrete tower base that is radiating heat it has no documented reason to produce. You do not know what is inside. You know only that 6 women have been missing for months, and that everything you are looking at should not exist. The decision to hold and wait, to not breach, to not risk a forced entry operation before the tactical team is in position, is one of the harder calls in fieldwork. If someone inside is monitoring for law enforcement activity, a premature approach could produce consequences that cannot be undone. Okafor made the call to hold. That decision bought 11 hours. And those 11 hours gave the FBI hostage rescue team time to get to Iowa. The Omaha field office's victim specialists had been notified by 8 p.m. on March 14th and were moving toward Boone County, not part of the breach team, not communicating on the tactical channel, positioned at a medical staging area 7 miles from the site, with a federal emergency medical response unit that had been pre-positioned by 9:30 p.m. The victim specialists had 6 family liaison files open. They had the photographs. They had the names. They had been living with those files for months. One victim specialist, identified in court support documents only by her title, later stated in a deposition that during the hours between 9 p.m. and 4 a.m., she reviewed each of the 6 files twice. Not for new information. She already knew the files. She reviewed them because she wanted the names in the front of her mind when the door opened. She wanted to be able to say each name correctly, without hesitation, the first time she said it. That detail was not in the federal indictment. It appeared in a supplemental victim services report filed with the Northern District of Iowa that was partially unsealed in April 2026. The HRT tactical unit assigned to the operation was based in Quantico, Virginia. A commercial flight to Des Moines would take 4 hours with optimal connections. There were no optimal connections at 9 p.m. on a March night. The unit deployed by chartered aircraft landed at Des Moines International Airport at 2:11 a.m. and transferred to ground vehicles for the 40-minute drive to Boone County. They arrived at the staging area at 2:58 a.m. The operation began at 4:12 a.m. Drone coverage of the site had been running since 11 p.m. Thermal imaging showed consistent heat output from the vault. At 1:47 a.m., a brief thermal signature showed a person moving inside the structure. That signature confirmed living occupants. It also confirmed that someone was awake inside at nearly 2 in the morning, which raised the possibility of a guard presence. The breach team adjusted. 4 agents entered through the turbine access road on foot. No vehicle lights. Suppressed communications. The ground was frozen hard enough to hold their weight without compression noise, a tactical advantage the team leader noted in his after-action report. Iowa State Patrol tactical units held a 3-mile perimeter on every county road approach. 2 additional HRT agents took elevated positions on the turbine maintenance platform, giving direct line of sight to the vault door and both sides of the access road. Drone thermal showed no movement outside the vault between 2:45 and 4:12 a.m. The perimeter on every county road approach was clean. The sky was beginning to gray at its lowest edge, that first irreversible suggestion of morning happening before any actual light arrives, when the lead agent reached the access door. At 4:13 a.m., the vault was open. What agents found inside that 12-foot deep concrete service vault on March 14, 2026, was documented in federal court records that have since been unsealed. 6 women, ages 23 to 28. All six reported missing between October 9th and November 15th, 2025, from Lincoln, Nebraska, Wichita, Kansas, Topeka, Kansas, Joplin, Missouri, Omaha, Nebraska, and Kansas City, Missouri. Each had been missing the full 116 days. Each required immediate medical attention and was transported to medical facilities before dawn broke across the Turbine field. One suspect was present inside the vault at the time of breach. He was taken into custody without incident at 4:14 a.m. Two additional suspects were arrested before 6 a.m. at separate locations in the Boone County area, identified through cell tower data collected under the warrant issued the previous evening. A federal medical response team walked the women out one at a time. Each was wrapped in a blanket. Each received on-site medical assessment before transport. None of the surrounding farmhouses showed a light. The county road was empty. The operation was over before the sun came up. The breach team leader's after-action report noted one detail. When the vault door opened, all six women moved toward the light simultaneously. Not toward the agents, toward the light. The first family notifications began at 5:22 a.m. The victim specialists placed the calls from a staging vehicle parked off the county road, while the last of the tactical team was still demobilizing from the perimeter. The calls were short. The specialists delivered the information clearly, confirmed the person was safe, gave the name of the hospital before anything else. They let silence happen on the other end of the line without filling it. All six calls were made by 6:08 a.m. The federal indictment, filed in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Iowa on March 18, 2026, named 7 defendants. 3 were in custody by dawn on March 14th. 4 additional defendants were identified through the financial trace of Meridian Leasework LLC and indicted within the week. The charges included conspiracy to commit forced labor, transportation of persons for purposes of labor trafficking, wire fraud, falsification of federal utility records, and conspiracy. The lead financial defendant, the individual who controlled the Cayman Islands intermediary linked to Meridian Leasework, was identified as a 44-year-old national with dual residency in the United States and Panama. He was arrested in Miami on March 20th. The 6 women were reunited with their families within 72 hours of the rescue. The last family reunion was documented in federal victim assistance records as occurring at 3:41 p.m. on March 16th at a hospital in Omaha, Nebraska. Before we get to the network analysis, there is something I want to sit with for a moment, because I do not think the case file alone communicates it clearly enough. Jane Doe 1, the 26-year-old LPN from Lincoln, had been working as a nurse for 3 years by the time she was taken. Her co-workers at the long-term care facility had organized a search effort in the weeks after her disappearance, posting flyers across West Lincoln, reaching out to the local news, coordinating with the Nebraska State Patrol Victim Services Unit. One colleague told investigators she had been scheduled to pick up a weekend shift the week she went missing, and had sent a text confirming she would be there. That text was the last communication anyone received from her before her car appeared at the truck stop on Interstate 80. The administrative assistant from Wichita had been saving money for 2 years to take her first international trip. Her passport was in a desk drawer in her apartment. Her roommate kept their shared apartment exactly as it was for the entire 116 days, based on the theory that changing anything felt like accepting that she was not coming back. She did come back. The details of what the 6 women experienced during 116 days inside that vault are documented in sealed victim testimony that has not been made available through public court filings. The indictment references conditions of confinement and coercion in language clinical enough to convey the legal framework without conveying the experience. The Federal Victim Services documentation notes that all 6 women received extended trauma-informed care following their release, and that their medical and psychological treatment was being coordinated through federal victim assistance resources. The case file can tell you the number of days. The number of days does not tell you what 116 days is. The system that allowed this to operate for 116 days did not fail by accident. It failed by design, not the design of the criminals, but the design of the regulatory framework they exploited. Wind infrastructure on federal lease sits in a gap between at least 4 separate regulatory authorities. That gap was known. It was documented in a 2022 GAO report on renewable energy infrastructure security that specifically identified service vault access and bypass power installations as areas without clear federal inspection authority. Nobody closed it. And a credentialing system with a single incomplete revocation step kept a suspect on an active access list for months after his termination. These are systemic failures, and the 7 defendants now in federal custody did not create them. The financial trace ran deeper than the 7 indicted defendants. Meridian Leasework LLC was one of at least 3 holding entities used to lease infrastructure sites across the upper Midwest. Federal investigators identified 2 additional lease arrangements, one in South Dakota, one in Minnesota, that had been flagged for examination as part of the ongoing investigation. No additional victims were located at either site. Whether those sites were intended for future use, had been used and vacated, or served a different operational purpose was not publicly confirmed as of the indictments. The lead financial defendant entered a not guilty plea at his initial appearance in Miami federal court on March 21st. His defense attorney filed a motion to suppress the utility records on Fourth Amendment grounds, arguing that the Iowa Utilities Board data had been obtained without a warrant and that the emergency warrant application retroactively applied to data already in investigators' hands did not cure the initial access. That motion was pending as of the filing date of the indictments. There is a technical argument in that motion worth acknowledging. The utility interconnect data that cracked this case open was pulled at the direction of a field agent before the emergency warrant was issued. Agent Okafor requested the utility pull at approximately 10:30 a.m. on March 14th. The warrant authorizing access to Meridian Leasework's financial and utility records was not issued until approximately 7 p.m. that same evening. The government's position is that the utility board data is a quasi-public regulatory record, not a private communication, and therefore outside the scope of Fourth Amendment protection. The defense's position is that it is functionally equivalent to an energy consumption search, which requires a warrant. Federal courts have not definitively resolved that question. Watch that docket. One defendant named in the indictment, listed as Defendant 5, had not been located as of the indictment filing date. Defendant 5 was identified as the individual responsible for maintaining the falsified Norwind scheduling records. His last confirmed location, established through cell tower data, was Des Moines, Iowa, on March 13th, the day before the breach. He appears to have been tipped off. How he learned that federal agents were moving on the site is a question that the indictment does not answer. A suspect vanished the day before the raid, with cell activity placing him 30 miles from the site. That is not a coincidence of timing. Someone in the information chain communicated something to him. Whether that means a law enforcement leak, a surveillance detection on the part of the suspects, or a monitoring system on the site's perimeter, the answer matters, and it has not been provided. The site perimeter question is one that the breach team's after-action report addresses only obliquely. The report notes that during the drone surveillance window between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., no exterior monitoring equipment was identified on or near the vault. It does not address whether monitoring equipment was identified during the post-breach forensic assessment. The forensic assessment report has not been made public. Whether the suspects had an early warning system, a motion sensor on the access road, a camera feed, a radio frequency trigger, and whether Defendant 5 received an alert from such a system on March 13th is not something the available public record resolves. It is the kind of question that tends not to get answered until a trial begins. If this case goes to trial, the bypass power line at Turbine 27 was decommissioned and the physical connection severed by Iowa utility workers on March 15th. A structural assessment of the vault was completed by a federal contractor on March 17th. The vault had been modified with additional ventilation, a secondary electrical panel, and a water recirculation system, modifications that required specific technical knowledge of the base structure's original specifications. The modifications were not improvised. They were engineered. The ventilation modification, a secondary duct system that exhausted through the turbine tower's interior rather than through the original exterior vent points, had been designed specifically to prevent heat signature detection from ground level. Only the residual warmth of the door itself remained as a detectable anomaly. Whoever engineered the duct rerouting had thought carefully about thermal detection. They had simply not thought carefully enough. Those construction drawings are not public records. They are held by Norwind Technical Services and by the original engineering firm that designed the Prairie Ridge facility. Whether additional individuals with access to those documents are under investigation was not confirmed in publicly available court filings as of the indictment date. The one detail that stuck with me throughout this entire case is not the thermal image of the frost ring, though that is the kind of thing you do not forget once you picture it. It is the entry in the Norwind dispatch log from November 18, 2025. The maintenance alert triggered automatically, as designed. It was logged and assigned. Then a single edited line made it disappear. Somewhere between the alert and the scheduling system, a person made a decision and typed a false completion date into a database. That entry kept 6 women inside a concrete vault for an additional 3 months and 12 days. One line, typed in under 10 seconds. 3 months and 12 days. The women were home by March 16th. The network, or the portion of it that had been mapped, was dismantled. The sites in South Dakota and Minnesota remained under investigation. Defendant 5 remained unlocated. The regulatory gap in federal wind infrastructure oversight that the operation had exploited was still, as of the indictment date, in the same condition it had been in when the 2022 GAO report documented it. A bipartisan group of 4 U.S. senators introduced legislation in early April 2026 that would require federal inspection authority over service vaults and wind infrastructure on federal lease, mandate a unified credentialing registry for all contractors with vault access, and impose criminal penalties for falsification of maintenance records in federally regulated infrastructure. The bill was assigned to the Senate Commerce Committee. It had not been scheduled for a markup hearing as of the date the indictments became public. That is not a comment on the legislators who introduced it. It is a comment on how long the distance is between a vault in a cornfield and a committee hearing room, and on all the things that can happen in that distance while the calendar moves. Drop a comment if you've heard about the South Dakota connection. We've seen it mentioned in federal filing documents but couldn't independently verify what agents found when they went through that site. Ethan Vasquez filed his inspection report for Turbine 27 on March 14th at 6:38 a.m., 36 minutes after his call to FBI Omaha. The report documented the anomalous door temperature, the frost ring observation, and his decision to contact law enforcement prior to accessing the vault. Under the terms of his service contract, he was required to document reasons for non-access. He checked the box labeled Safety Concern, Other, and wrote in the description field 4 words. Door was too warm. His service contract was with Norwind Technical Services. Norwind's internal review board placed him on administrative hold for 3 days following the discovery, while it assessed whether his decision to contact law enforcement before his employer constituted a contract violation. It did not. He returned to work on March 18th. He has not spoken publicly about the case. The network is mapped. The demand that built it has not changed. And somewhere between a Delaware shell and a Cayman intermediary and a falsified maintenance log, at least one person who knew exactly what that vault contained is not in custody. The frost melted weeks ago. The turbine still does not generate power. The access road shows vehicle tracks from the federal assessment team, now overlaid with 2 weeks of Iowa spring mud. Nobody drove past it today. Nobody will tomorrow.